What's up, everyone? After the fearful periods of the Middle Ages, we now focus on the greatest tragedy of the 20th century, the Holocaust. What would your life be like if you were born Jewish in Germany or an occupied country during the Hitler era? We will see how a person's identity, constitutional rights, and ultimately their right to life were taken away step by step. Let's examine my life, the constant fear, and the struggle to maintain human dignity in this age of despair. Don't forget to like the video, and I truly enjoy reading your own what-if comments. Life began in the early 1930s, in Germany or in the occupied territories. I was no different from other children. I played games, and I went to school. However, there was one undeniable fact in my birth identity. I was Jewish. This fact, with the rise of Hitler to power, quickly began to turn into a death warrant. The oppression, which initially started with just social exclusion and humiliation, quickly evolved into a policy of legal discrimination. Suddenly, I was no longer a citizen of the country, but an undesirable element. As my family and I watched the world turn against us, we realized that innocence was rapidly coming to an end. My mere existence was now a crime against the society I belonged to. Normal life ended step by step with the rise of Hitler. The first signs were SA soldiers waiting in front of our shops and the signs appearing on windows. Do not buy from Jews. Even our neighbors, whom we used to trust and live alongside, quickly began to distance themselves from us out of fear or conviction. We were being excluded from social life, banned from parks, cinemas, and public places. This isolation meant not only physical, but also spiritual isolation. Even conversations within the family turned into whispers. The feeling of being listened to and watched at every moment was an integral part of our daily lives. For me, the old joyful life had been replaced by constant vigilance and fear. The biggest blow came with the Nuremberg laws, enacted in 1935. These laws legally seized my identity and human rights. I was no longer a German citizen. I was merely a state subject. This meant I had lost all my legal and constitutional protections. Even more devastatingly, these laws completely separated us from the rest of society by prohibiting us from marrying or having sexual relations with non-Jewish Germans. For me, this was not just a legal text, but a document of stigma. My existence was now legally invalidated even in the land where I was born. These laws were the first and most critical step in the process of dehumanizing us, piece by piece. Social isolation was the most visible and constant form of oppression. From 1941 onwards, every Jew over the age of 6 was required to wear a yellow star on their clothing. This small piece of fabric instantly turned me into a target in public. Walking on the street, every eye would turn to me, whispers would rise, and hateful stares would gather on me. This star was not just an identity label, but also a constant humiliation and a threat of physical violence. I no longer had the luxury of walking around like a normal person. I was a stigmatized being under constant threat. This star showed us that anything could be done to us at any moment, and that society no longer protected us. Kristallnacht night of broken glass in 1938 was the breaking point where violence became institutional and organized. That night, synagogues, businesses, and homes were looted and burned by Nazi gangs and citizens. My family and I hid inside the house during that night of terror, listening to the sounds of breaking glass and screams from outside. This event showed us that the period of legal oppression was over, and the era of physical violence had begun. Not only our rights, but also our lives were now at risk. The state was not just ignoring the violence committed against us, but actively encouraging it. For me, this was the bitter proof that no hope or security remained in German society. We were systematically excluded from economic and educational life. First, we were expelled from professional life. Doctors, lawyers, and civil servants lost their jobs. Then, Jewish children were banned from attending German schools. I was suddenly condemned to a life that was futureless and purposeless. My father losing his job quickly plunged our family into poverty. All we could do was find small, illegal jobs to make ends meet. This exclusion not only financially ruined us, but also completely isolated us socially. Germany was refusing to give us even the basic means to live. It was a slow death. The desire to leave the country was a constant source of hope for me and my family. But this dream quickly hit the wall of bureaucratic obstacles and financial impossibilities. Other countries had closed their doors to refugees. Very few countries would grant us visas. To escape, we had to pay high taxes, leave all our property behind, and collect countless documents. Every attempt was doomed to be a long wait and eventually a rejection. Even our passports were stamped, immediately exposing us at every border crossing. Escape was not just a financial difficulty, but also a spiritual torment. Because the world was rejecting us, the next and most terrifying phase of our lives was the forced relocation to the ghetto. We were torn away from our homes, our workplaces, and everything we knew. All Jews were driven into the worst, oldest, and most crowded areas of the cities, into ghettos surrounded by walls and barbed wire. We were no longer individuals. We were part of a collective punishment. For me, the ghetto was not just a living space, but a tool for systematic imprisonment and starvation. Entering the ghetto meant cutting all ties with the outside world. Here, we had to live not by our own rules, but by the arbitrary rules of the guards and Nazi officials. Daily life in the ghetto was a pure struggle for survival. Food was a diminishing resource every day. The rations provided were barely enough to keep us alive. Overcrowding, lack of hygiene, and malnutrition caused diseases like typhus to spread rapidly. Heating was almost impossible during the cold winter months. Being a child was a distinct danger even in the ghetto. Our games had been replaced by the search for food and the fear of death. For me, the ghetto was the place where human dignity was most severely tested. Waking up every morning was a small victory of defeating the day before. Despite the physical difficulties, our resistance within the ghetto was based on secretly continuing education and culture. Adults would establish clandestine schools in small groups, teaching children history, language, and religion. Music, poetry, and theater would be performed in basements or hidden rooms. These activities were not just a hobby, but an effort to preserve our identity and humanity. They reminded us that no matter how thick the walls outside were, our minds and souls could remain free. Life in the ghetto slowly killed the body, but we made a great effort to keep the spirit alive. Within the ghettos, there was resistance that manifested in different ways. Some, like in the Warsaw Ghetto, chose armed and active resistance, while for most, resistance was a passive and spiritual act. Resistance meant keeping a diary, reading a forbidden book, or giving a piece of bread to a neighbor. Hope was constantly tested by reality. Seeing a friend or relative disappear every day deepened the despair. Nevertheless, not giving up completely was preserving the last fortress of our humanity. For me, resistance was more than just survival. It was choosing to remain human. The biggest fear of the ghetto was the lie of resettlement to the east. German authorities would tell us that they were taking us to elements in the east with better living and working conditions. People wanted to believe this propaganda because the truth was too horrible to comprehend. It took us too long to realize that these train transports were actually one-way tickets to death camps. This deception was not just a lie, but also a method to pacify us by stealing our hope until our last moments. Even as we stepped into the train wagons, we still wanted to believe that we were going towards a possibly better future. The train journey was the first physical experience of horror. We were crammed into cattle cars, so crowded we couldn't even stand up. There were no windows, ventilation was inadequate, and even the most basic human needs could not be met. This journey, which lasted for days, was both physical and psychological torture. The elderly, the sick, and children lost their lives on this journey. The helplessness, pain, and stench inside the car gave us a horrific hint about our final destination. For me, that car was a coffin where human dignity was crushed along with the filth inside it. Upon arriving at the concentration camp, the terrifying moment of selection came. As soon as the train doors opened, families were quickly separated by guards. Based on our health, age, and working capacity, a Nazi doctor would direct me to the right or to the left with just a movement of his hand. Right meant temporary work, while left meant immediate death gas chambers. This moment, when my mother, father, or sibling was separated from me, was the most traumatic and defining moment of my life. This meant a world where absolute arbitrariness reigned, not a rational life for me anymore. Camp life was an existence where human dignity was completely zeroed out. Every day was spent in the same grey-striped pajama-like clothes, under the threat of hunger, forced labor, and constant beatings. Sleep was a brief escape that took place on crowded wooden bunks. Food rations were only enough to keep me on the verge of survival. Cold, exhaustion, and disease were our daily killers. The arbitrary violence and sadistic behavior of the guards dictated every moment of our lives. For me, the camp was not just a prison, but the place where human resilience and the power of the soul were most severely tested. With arrival at the camp, our identity was completely seized. Our names, personal belongings, and even our hair were taken from us. We were given a number that was tattooed onto our arms. I was no longer a person for society, but a nameless number, a part of the Nazi system. This number became an identity not only for the guards, but also for myself. This was the final and most definitive step in the process of dehumanization. The number represented both my existence and the magnitude of the crime the Nazis committed against us. Being a woman meant an added layer of threat in the camps. In addition to the hunger and forced labor faced by men, we women were targeted for sexual violence, harassment, and especially medical experiments. Sterilization and other inhumane experiments were frequently performed by Nazi doctors. Women tried to support each other even within the camps, keeping spiritual solidarity alive. For me, this period meant fighting not only physical hardships, but also the extra fear brought by my gender. Despite all the horror of the camp, spiritual resistance was the last fortress of our struggle to remain human. Small acts of solidarity, sharing a piece of bread, whispering encouragement to a sick person, were the last remnants of humanity for us. Even in the camps, we secretly prayed, and religious holidays were attempted to be celebrated with the simplest symbols. These actions countered the Nazi goal of completely turning us into soulless robots. For me, survival was not just breathing, but also preserving the faith and human dignity in my soul, which was the only thing the Nazis couldn't take from us. The final days of the camp were filled with the rare hope of liberation, or the terror of the final death marches. As Allied forces approached, the Nazis would force prisoners on long marches, death marches, to destroy evidence. These marches were a final torture, where thousands died from cold and exhaustion. If we were lucky, we would stay in the camp and witness the moment Allied soldiers opened the gates. Liberation was a momentary joy, but also a huge trauma, accompanied by physical collapse and the uncertainty of the future. That day, I understood that freedom was not just a word. Even after liberation, my life was never the same. The physical and psychological damage of the camp and trauma were permanent. I had lost everything, including my family, friends, and home. Although the post-war world offered me a new start, the shadows in my memory were always with me. The responsibility to tell what happened and ensure it was never forgotten fell upon the shoulders of the survivors. For me, this difficult journey was not just a history lesson, but proof that human dignity is a value that must be defended at all costs. So that was my life of fear, isolation, and struggle for survival as a Jew during the Hitler era. After the arbitrary violence of the witch hunt, we faced the most brutal form of organized evil here. After this journey, I understood how sacred the modern Declaration of Human Rights and Tolerance truly are. Which challenging era should we visit in our next video? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this alternate history journey, please don't forget to subscribe and like the video. See you in the next adventure. Take care and remember, never again.